Hi, welcome to this programming user interface video. Today we're going to be talking about Canvas and doing a Canvas demonstration. Canvas is basically a way for us to do raster imaging and drawing in the browser. So when I say canvas, I'm talking about the actual HTML element. There's a canvas element you put into your HTML code, but really that's just kind of like a display kind of canvas or a display output for this very kind of evolved and developed API, which lets you do raster-based drawings in the browser. So if you're going to be doing anything such as like animations or developing games or doing any sort of like image manipulation in real time, you'd want to be using a canvas and the JavaScript API. So this is opposed to say using HTML or CSS and even like SVG graphics, which are vector based, right? They can scale infinitely. These are canvas, so these are like pixel based animations or image manipulations, etc. So it's really good for doing kind of elaborate animations or moving a lot of pixels around and stuff like that. This is not designed to do like basic user interfaces and stuff like that or like form inputs or anything like that. This is mostly around kind of these more graphic based kind of elements of your web design or interface. So the canvas provides kind of this output point for all the results, and you do all of this manipulation of these pixels and drawing and stuff like that inside of JavaScript. So it's all JavaScript, and then the output just displayed in this element. So 2D is a lot simpler than 3D, of course, as we've seen with like 3D CSS transitions and stuff like that. There's a lot more to kind of think about when you're doing those in three-dimensional space. So if you were going to do something around 3D stuff, you'd probably want to use an existing library that uses something like WebGL, like 3JS to get started with that. But we're going to be looking at first at just getting started with some basic Canvas stuff. So as usual, the Mozilla Developer Portal has a really great tutorial on getting started with Canvas. And so we are going to just try to do some basic thing, like let's make like a little basic interaction where we draw a square or something and we can move it around the screen using the keyboard. And this will introduce the various kind of components of getting a Canvas element up and running. So we're going to head over to our glitch site and we're going to make a new glitch project, just a static page. And so there's a few kind of steps when you're working with Canvas and getting started is you have to define this Canvas element, so where all the graphics are going to live. You have to kind of size it to the right size you want. Then you basically kind of instantiate a context. And so this is a little confusing, but the context is basically just the interface to all the things like drawing lines, drawing rectangles, and all the stuff about drawing these pixels. So you define the canvas element, you define the context, and then you kind of can start uh, doing stuff with it. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is get our HTML ready. And so, of course, this HTML is just basically where our canvas element's going to live. And we have to have that defined in the DOM tree for the JavaScript to interact with it and display the results. So I'm going to just clean this up a little bit, get rid of some of the stuff, and put in a canvas element. And so this canvas element would need to, we're going to give it a little ID because we're going to select it later via JavaScript to kind of say, this is the canvas I want to interact with. So I'm just going to call it canvas as the ID as well. And then we could do some things with the CSS for the body and stuff like that. If we really wanted to, we could set the body to have, no pat margin or padding or stuff like that if we wanted to. So really about kind of figuring out how to get this canvas element in the right position on your page is a big part of it. In this example, we're just going to kind of have it there and give it a certain size, but you might want to spend time, like making it in a certain place if it's going to be used for like decoration or effect, or you might want it to have like a whole, full screen, so take up the entire browser real estate if you're doing some sort of like game or interactive thing. But this is kind of pretty much all we need for the HTML aspect of it. We just have to have the canvas element defined, and we're going to give it an ID so we can select it. Everything else from this point is going to be JavaScript. So we're going to make a JavaScript library, and this is all vanilla JavaScript. This is all built into the the basic of modern browsers JavaScript API. And so you don't need to use any libraries or anything like that, just to do this basic stuff. So the first thing we want to do is get a pointer to the canvas element that we're going to use. And so this is very familiar. We're going to use the get element by ID. So we're going to say document get element by ID, and we're going to pass the canvas ID. And so the next thing we need to do is basically resize the canvas element itself in the DOM, just to tell how big we want it to be. And so we're just going to set an arbitrary size, and we're going to say canvas.width is going to be, we're going to make it 1,000 pixels wide, and the canvas.height, we'll make it 500 pixels tall. And so these are actually setting the attributes of the canvas element itself. And this is important because the canvas element uses the size, it knows how big it is, so then it knows how to draw stuff internally. And since everything is pixel based in Canvas, you needed to think about measurements and size and things in pixels. And so that's why we're defining this in JavaScript to use a pixel based size. So let's just make sure this works and looks right. So if I inspect this, I should be able to see our canvas element here. So there it is, defined. The attributes are set to be 1,000 in width as an attribute there, and 500 in height as an attribute. So our place where this is going to live is all set up. The next thing we need to do is instantiate this context. And so the context is basically just a pointer to the canvas elements API context where we can start doing things like drawing stuff. And so we're going to say var context, we're just called CTX, and it's going to be equal to the canvas get context. And inside of here, we just have to say what kind of context we want to pass. So that you can do 2D context and also 3D, but 3D is more based nowadays on like WebGL and stuff like that. So mostly you'd be using 2D context for our purposes. And then you'd use WebGL for 3D stuff. So now that we have the context, we have access to all these methods built into the context of this drawing. So you could go and browse and look at all the various methods built in. So you can draw shapes, rectangles. You can draw paths. So arbitrary polygons and polygons and stuff like that. You can draw lines, like with arcs, etc. And so you'll see all these things are built into the CTX variable. So they're saying get context 2D. And so all these methods are built into the CTX variable that we're going to be using. So there's many kind of different methods built in that can help you do, all these elemental things, right? The very basic kind of level things that you might want to do. But even if this seems simple, doing a Bezier curve is very kind of complicated, and it provides you methods and actually to be able to do that. So we're going to draw a rectangle basically, just as to get started. And each one of these methods has its own parameters you need to pass to it and know what they're supposed to do. But in our case, we're just going to say CTX fill rectangle. So this basically means fill it with a color, make it not transparent or stroked, but actually have a color inside. And it takes three parameters you pass to it. You want to say where does it start on the XY coordinates, and then how big it should be on the width and height dimensions. All right, so let's say it's going to start 10 pixels in on the X coordinate and then 10 pixels down on the Y coordinate. In this case, it's important to think about the coordinate system. If you ever do like graphing and math and stuff like that, like the coordinate system, like 0, 0 is in the middle of the screen, right? But in this case, 0, 0 is the upper left of the canvas. And so our canvas is 1,000 pixels wide and 500 tall, and then 0, 0 is in the top left. So in this case, we're saying, okay, 10 pixels over and 10 pixels down, and then we have to say how big it should be, right? So let's make it 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall. And so if we take a look at the result of that, this just runs immediately, right, when this page loads. So we have a rectangle there, right? Let's make this a little bit bigger. And so it's 10, it's 50 pixels wide and 50 tall, and then it's 10 offset from the top left, right? So we could make this 100, and it would be 100 down and 100 over, right? In context of how big the canvas element is. All right, so you can do stuff like set the color, the fill color. So you could say ttx.fill color equals, you could pass an RGB value, you could pass a hex number or a hex value for, that. You could also use our favorite thing, using CSS constant color names. So tomato, right? So we should have a red square there, which we don't. Probably because this should be fill style, not fill color. So if you want to set the style of the fill of the next operations, right, you set it to fill style, and then there's our red tomato color. So you notice like this change basically changes the context of the canvas, right? We're saying like, okay, from now on the fill style is going to be tomato color, and then everything you do after that is in that color for the fill style. And then you have to change it to something else. So you can kind of think of this as like linear progression of steps. Like do this part first, then go to here, and then draw this line here, then set the color differently, and then do the next part. So that's kind of like how you would do this, right? So this is pretty boring, right? So let's think about we could incorporate this with some other JavaScript stuff we already know how to do. So we could think about key event listeners. So we know how to do event listeners. So we could do something with that. So let's say when we move the keyboard keys, the arrow keys, that it actually does something. So what we could do is set up that event listener. So we'll say window.event listener. And we'll say, okay, we want to listen for the key down event. And then if that happens, we want to do this function. Pass the event variable to it. So let's just console logs to make sure that our event is working. So we should see, anytime we press a key on the keyboard, we should see some events, right, triggering in the console. So let's take a look. Oh, spelled event listener probably wrong there. So I put the wrong, we're not doing event listener, we're saying add event listener, of course, event listener, instead of just event listener. And so now when I use a keyboard, any key on the keyboard, it kind of reports the event to me. So if we're going to be using the down key, the arrows on the keyboard, then we'd be interested in these various events where it's like arrow left is the key, or arrow up, arrow right, and arrow down. So we could test for these events and then do something, right? All right, so the next thing we want to do is basically put our code inside of this event listener, right? So the thing we want it to do when the key happens is, redraw it, right? So let's test for the right key. So we'll say if event dot key equals arrow right, then do this. So basically what we want to do is if you hit the arrow right key, then we want to draw the rectangle, but move it over a little bit, right? And so we introduced a new problem here where we need to keep track of like where the rectangle actually is currently, right? So let's define some new variables, and we'll call this rect x equals start off at 100, and var rect y is equal to 100, right? So now these variables represent where our rectangle currently is. So we could say, okay, whenever they hit the right arrow key, then we want to add 1 to the x axis, right? So we'll say rect x equals rect x plus 10. So every time you hit the right key, it increases the x rect x variable, and then the last thing we want to do is redraw the rectangle, right? So we'll do another fill rectangle with the updated positions. Let's see how it looks. So I'm gonna hit right, and so you can see it's drawing, but it's leaving behind its own previous draw methods, right, or draw attempts. So if you think about this, how this works with like animation or games, right, you kind of have to like clear the screen before you draw the next frame, right? It's the same idea if you're doing like a manual animation or something like that, or any sort of game development, right? You need to clear the screen before you redraw the next step. And so there's better ways of doing this for the browser using request animation frame and stuff like that. But we're just going to do kind of a very basic version of this. So we're just going to basically say, okay, every time they press the keyboard, we're going to clear the screen. And so you can clear the screen by basically drawing a clear rectangle over the entire surface of the canvas area, and that basically just removes everything. So you can say ctx dot fill clear, and it's the same parameter. So we start at 0x 0y, so the top left, and then go over 1,000, and then go down 500, right? So basically the entire area. So let's see if this works. So now when I press right, oh, fill clear is not the right one. Let's take a look what it should be. Maybe it's sorry, clear rect, probably not clear fill. So clear fill rect. Let's see if that is it. Yeah. So now when I basically use the arrow keys on the right arrow key, it's clearing everything, drawing the new rectangle, and to us it appears like it's removing it, right? When it's actually just drawing it over and over again and wiping the screen each time. So we could quickly come in here and just fill in the rest of this, right? Since we can move it left and right, but then we'd also need to know where it is in the X and Y plane too. That would be covered by the Y, so we need to add some more event listeners. So when they hit the right arrow, go right. When you hit the left arrow, -10. And then the same deal for the y-axis. So when they do the up arrow, and we want to do y instead of x. So when they go up, we want to get smaller in the y plane. And then if they go down, we want to get bigger in the y plane. All right, so, oh, rect, spelled rect wrong. On line 59. All right, let's fix that everywhere. RECTY. All right, so now the variables are named right. So when I go up, right, up, down, left, right? So this is pretty simple, right? Pretty limited, and there's the edge of our canvas, right? So this is pretty straightforward, right? It's pretty simple. You are not doing anything as far as like collision detection or any sort of like kind of, because it's starting to look like some sort of game, basic game, right? But you're just using these very simple commands, we can get started and actually drawing this, right? So you could kind of think about using all these primitive things to start drawing more complicated scenes or doing stuff like that. So in our course, when we've been looking at where Canvas has been applied, oftentimes it's been used either basically to control the entire site. So the entire site is a Canvas element, and you have these very complicated interactions. Or oftentimes we've seen it just in one little area where it's kind of like just used as a kind of decoration. So we've seen this in examples where like, very fluid raster animations are used, and that'd be very difficult to do in a sort of CSS way, animation way. And so, you can think about, these little aspects of this where you'd want to put this usage of this, right? So you could even like just make this like a little fun game on your homepage, right? So you could say, because this is still just it's still just a canvas element. So you could do something like this. So instead of making it a static height, you could say window dot inner height or inner width, and then you could set it to window dot inner height. So now the canvas is going to fill up the entire area, and it has this little scroll problem here. I think we can get rid of that by making the the canvas element actually display as a block. Yeah. That kind of just changes the render mode for the canvas element in the DOM for the CSS, so it's displayed as a block. So now the CSS or the canvas element goes all the way down to the bottom of the screen. Interesting. Maybe not. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder what happens when it gets down there. Hmm. Oh, right, because we're clearing 1000 by 500, and so we would need to clear the entire screen. We'd have to update that code too, right? So it was just clearing out the old parts of it when we were doing this rect. So we'd actually need to clear the entire thing. So we could just reuse this variable and say, always clear the width and the height of the canvas element instead of this hard-coded value. All right, so let's see if that works now. Yeah, pretty much. You'd want to play around with the margins and borders of the page or something like that, but it's pretty much right. So, if you're thinking about like, oh, this would just be like a fun little thing in the background for my homepage, right? You could say you could still have like your homepage, right? And what you could actually do with the canvas element is, set it, display or position it to be absolute. Actually, let's play around with this in the browser. It's easier. So we could set the canvas element to be displayed or positioned absolutely, and then we could set it to be left 0, top 0, and then we could set the z index of it to be like -1, so it's actually like below everything. And so now it's like this let's put this in the code. And so now it's like this like little background decoration thing, right? And like your home page is still here and it still works, and but like if you press the button, if you use the keys, you actually like be moving around stuff in the background. So you can think about this and how it just basically fits into it's like another element in your kind of toolbox to do something with more raster based things. So you can do all sorts of stuff with it. It's just a very useful additional tool. So the next thing that we might want to do though is you can see that the same way that we were using vanilla JavaScript in earlier lectures, it's fine, right? It makes sense. It's very kind of straightforward, but it's like very verbose and very kind of like a lot of boilerplate to get things working. And so there exists different kind of libraries out there that let you get started much more quickly. So for example, if you just Google awesome canvas GitHub, you find this page, awesome canvas GitHub, and it's basically a little like this awesome kind of idea where it lists a bunch of resources for something. And so you can see here it has, sorry, let me pull that up. You can see here it has, this is the page, and it has some libraries. And so it talks about the various libraries that you can use that are kind of help you with this canvas drawing. And of course, these are mostly 2D things. And then, for example, like 3JS is WebGL 3D stuff. So, you could pick one of these. Each one of them kind of has its own little kind of niche they're trying to fill. Like, so some of them might be developed more towards gaming, or one might be developed more towards kind of like uh, more efficient or performance-based things. Some are a little bit more based towards like design aesthetics and stuff like that. So for example, if we picked one like this PS5, you could basically go into the examples and see what it can do, right? And so, it does have some 3D stuff it looks like, but if you want to draw, particles, right? This is just basically using Canvas stuff, but it provides you this boilerplate stuff where it allows you to do this much more quickly than having to like invent all that from scratch, right? And even just doing basic stuff like drawing simple shapes and stuff like that. Um, Lines and stuff, right? So, this is just Canvas drawing pixels in a Canvas element, but it makes it much simpler, right, than if you were going to do it with drawing it by vanilla Canvas API stuff. So let's just go through and like let's just do this example because this would be kind of like a fun thing to do on your homepage or something like that. So first we need to do is get this in our browser, right? Get it working. And so let's go to the homepage. We'll do get started. And so basically they say, okay, so you now it's like similar to like learning jQuery or something like that. You have to learn the vernacular of this library and how it wants you to actually interact with it. And so what we can find here is like, okay, so you gotta set up a canvas. This is how you create canvas in the library. And then this is the main thing that draws it, right? There's the draw function that you do. And so basically we need to get this library included in our page. So here they actually have like a CDN for us, so we'll just use that. We'll do a new glitch. And so we just want to include their library and then kind of quickly learn how to use their API and stuff and to get it working. So, it says they say you should put it in your head and, before your code that you're going to use. And we've been putting our code in the body, so that doesn't matter for us. So we'll put this in our head before the other script we're including, which is blank. And then we'll just put our code down here. So as long as that script's included, it knows what it means when you say setup function. Actually, it's defined for it already. And so let's go back to that example here that we just saw really quickly for drawing. And so basically, let's just copy and paste and see if it works. So the setup is going to create a canvas. And so you'd have to research what these different functions do for this specific library. But a background sets the background to a certain color probably, and then stroke draws something. And so this thing like this P5, it automatically helps you do these keyboard events and mouse events, right? Mouse is pressed does not exist in vanilla JavaScript, but this kind of wraps that event listener and it does it for you automatically. So if we take a look to see if this works, right? And so without basically having to write all that boilerplate and all those event listeners and all the stuff, this library just incorporates that for you. So it just works very easily. So if you're going to do stuff like that, I mean, adding kind of decorative effects, I would definitely look at using these like libraries to make that a little bit simpler. And of course, there's much more complicated stuff around 3D things, and it's a whole nother world that you'd have to get into. But 3JS is kind of pretty much a very good one to use, and they have some examples of various capabilities of it, right? So if you're gonna start doing something 3D, you probably want to start off very basic, like just drawing a sphere or a box, right, and having it animated. But again, you're no longer in the realm of like JavaScript APIs, or into the realm of like how does 3JS implement this WebGL interface and get started using it. So the next step would be to pick out which library you want to use and then try to like figure out how it's designed. So hopefully this is kind of a good start to get you begin working with Canvas and seeing the kind of possibilities of it. There's lots of good examples out there of without having to reinvent the wheel of some sort of design elements. And there's lots of libraries if you're more interested in like developing a little mini game and stuff like that. So you can get started with Canvas and think about how you want to use it in your site and when it should be used and when it would be most effective. But I think that's it for this video. So thanks for watching and I'll talk to you later. Bye.